I'm always left wanting more from the Ohio State defensive line. I'm not saying they're not disruptive. They are disruptive, but we are applying, logic to this Ohio State defensive line as if it's Nick Bosa on the left and Joey Bosa on the right. And I don't think that's the case. And yet that's the way they're being billed. So is this defensive line as good as people think nationally? Hello and welcome in. It is a Wednesday edition of Always College Football. I'm your host, Rick McElroy, and it is the 23rd of October. We appreciate you being here. We have been called out. All right. We have been challenged by people in the comments section. We have heard from you. We have seen it, and we wanted to do something about it. So what did we do? We went out and we got a guy that I think is as qualified to comment on the upcoming subjects as humanly possible. You have said we are a show that exclusively covers the Southeastern Conference. That is not true. We cover all of college football. We do generate a lot more clicks in the southeastern part of the United States. I did play quarterback at Alabama after all, but we talk about the Big Ten. We talk about what's going on the West Coast. We talk about what's going on in the ACC. But today, we've heard a lot of the rumblings. We wanted to bring on Todd Blackledge to talk about what's going on in the Big Ten. We'll talk about Ohio State. We'll talk about Oregon. He called the game between the two just a couple weeks ago. We'll talk about his alma mater, Penn State. He's seen them up close and personal against Illinois. We'll talk about Illinois. We'll talk a little bit about Michigan. What the heck has gone on with the Wolverines, and we'll talk about one of the great stories in the sport today. That is the Indiana Hoosiers and where they go now with the injury to their quarterback, Curtis Rourke. Continue to ask all of you to like, rate, and subscribe to the show. For those that say we are SEC homers, well, we're doing a show with a heavy lean and a heavy focus on Big Ten football today. So telling you, we can do it. We can go anywhere because we cover the whole sport, and we will continue to here on Always College Football. So let's dive into one of the great college football minds of his generation. He's Todd Blackledge. I think he's the best doing it. He's Todd Blackledge. He's my idol in the business. It's always great to have him back. He is. I actually mean that. I really believe that. If someone says, hey, you could have a career like Todd Blackledge, like I am in 100%. Todd, just want to start with everything that y'all got going at NBC. It's been a great watch. You and Noah have been terrific.
Thank you.
I've really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, you left the crew that I now am
That's
a part
right.
of. And every week I get told I miss Todd. Every week.
Well, there's some mean-spirited guys. There's a couple mean-spirited guys on that crew. They don't really mean it. They like to dig a little bit. So you're doing fine. I've heard good reports. You're doing fine. You're fitting in just nicely. But yeah, great group of guys.
They are a good group, and they're fun, and they miss you, as they've told me many, many times. We'll dive in. You've done one of the biggest games of the year so far.
Mm-hmm.
I know you have more coming. Seeing the NBC slate upcoming, man, y'all have had some awesome games, and I know
it's been a lot better this year. Yeah, it's been. It's amazing the addition of the 4 teams from the West Coast. Kind of knew it was going to help the schedule and enhance for everybody, for all 3 networks that are doing the Big Ten, and it certainly has. It's made for some really fun matchups for us.
Well, no bigger than Oregon, Ohio State.
Yeah.
For that to be on y'all's air, I know was a tremendous thrill. And for those of us that went up against it, not so fun. But I look at it, and it's really awesome to see what those 2 teams were able to do on the field. So we'll start there.
Yeah.
Oregon, they won the game. I came away very impressed with what we saw from them, but I came away also thinking if they played Ohio State again, I don't know if it would go that direction. So what was your takeaway watching the Ducks?
Yeah, I thought they were very evenly matched teams going in. I thought maybe from top to bottom, Ohio State had better talent, on both sides of the ball. But I was very impressed with how physical Oregon was at the line of scrimmage. I just felt like, any kind of game of that magnitude, no matter how many skilled guys you have, how great your quarterback, everybody, it's still going to be won or lost at the line of scrimmage. And I thought Oregon more than held their own from a physical standpoint. I thought that Ohio State had an advantage with their two defensive tackles on the inside against the center and two guards of Oregon. I thought the two offensive tackles for Oregon are really good and they'd handle their business. But the whole offensive line played well. I mean, they won at the line of scrimmage. And then I thought defensively, the front seven, particularly without their best player, most dominant player in Jordan Birch, who was out with an injury, really played well. So I was very impressed with them at the line of scrimmage. Dylan Gabriel played big in a big moment, and it was a fun game to do. And the funny thing about Oregon is they won the game and they made more mistakes. I mean they had the botched extra point, then they felt like they had to go for two, and then they missed a field goal, and all those things left it as a 1-point game where they could have lost on a field goal at the end, but they found a way to win when it was all said and done.
It was super impressive, and there were mistakes made for sure. It was far from a flawless performance. To still get a win against a team like that is really impressive. There had been this long discussion about the West Coast teams, and look, you can almost look, no disrespect, but you can remove Washington, you can remove SC right now based on where they've gone in their season. You can remove UCLA, but Oregon and the personnel they have at wide receiver, that Ohio State has not seen weapons like that, and in their time in the Big Ten. So as a result, their DBs got exposed, and their best DB gave up $180 through the year. Man. So is that a real thing? Have the receivers that Ohio State's been covering for years, have they been that human to that Oregon's going to be able to just create chunk yardage all the time against Big Ten competition?
I'd say there's some truth to that. I think over the last couple of years in the Big Ten, it's been a real defensive heavy conference. And I don't think there's been great offenses. And even the last couple of years when Michigan beat Ohio State, they did it more by running the football and being physical and J.J. McCarthy extending plays on third down and doing things like that. It wasn't necessarily with great wideouts. I mean, Michigan didn't have a slew of great wideouts over the last couple of years when they beat Ohio State. So I think there is some to that. I also think Ohio State didn't do themselves any favors with their non-conference schedule and who they played before they got into playing Big Ten games. So it was a huge step up for them. Now, I think they've got really good people on defense. I think Denzel Burke had a very bad day. I think he's much better than he showed in that game. But the reality was in the fourth quarter, they couldn't get off the field. They never forced a punt. They didn't pressure Dylan Gabriel. And so, those two defensive ends that are both kind of all-conference guys, they were very quiet in the fourth quarter. And so, that's the biggest thing to me I think they will have addressed in this bye week going forward as an Ohio State defense.
And I remember a couple of years ago, JT Tuimoloau, it's like he went out and had the most ridiculous game I think I've ever seen with my own two eyes against Penn State. Remember? Right. It's like, oh my God. Like, who is this guy? And since then, it's like I'm always left wanting more from the Ohio State defensive line. I'm not saying they're not disruptive. They are disruptive, but we are applying, logic to this Ohio State defensive line as if it's Nick Bosa on the left and Joey Bosa on the right. And I don't think that's the case. No. Yet that's the way they're being billed. So is this defensive line as good as people think nationally?
Yeah, I don't think the two ends are dynamic pass rush guys. I think they're really good against the run. I think they're great at setting the edge. I think they show up in the pass game because of their ability to power rush at times, but they're not dynamic. And like I said, the two offensive tackles for Oregon, I mean, Jack Sawyer, I don't remember ever calling his name in the game. He was never a factor. I think the two inside guys, their tackles are twitchy and athletic and a handful, and they're more dynamic, I think, than the two outside guys. So, and it's funny, too, because in talking to Jim Knowles, I think he's struggling with this balance between, in other places he's been, he's had to be more creative. He's had to figure out ways to bring pressure and do things. But now he's got talent at Ohio State that he's never had. And so he's back and forth with how much do I need to do? How much should I do? Do I have to be creative? And I think it'll be interesting to see just where they go from here coming out of the bye week after some things that were exposed in that game against Oregon.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. It's going to be really interesting. And Jim Knowles at Oklahoma State, it was like he'd blitz the ball boy if he could. Like this guy, he didn't care. Like now it's like, all right, 4 3/4. Sounds good. It's weird. Penn State, your alma mater. I don't look. I think they're different this year, and I'm not suggesting that they're going to go and win the national championship. I'm not even so much suggesting they're going to go beat Ohio State. I'm not. But I do think they showed some serious gumption going on the road to SC, and I do think there's some creativity offensively. I think Aller has shown that he can make the big throw when it's needed. They've had good tight ends, so that's not new. But I still like the run game. I don't know how effective it's going to be against top-tier competition. I know the defense is great. So is this year different for Penn State so far?
I think it is. I think Drew is a different quarterback. I think last year he was really, he had good numbers last year, but I think in a lot of ways he was playing not to lose a game, not taking chances, not pushing the ball downfield. I think this year he's been much more aggressive. I think he's playing with a lot more freedom under Andy Kotelnicki. He's actually thrown more interceptions this year already than he did all of last year. Right. So, which is fine because I think he's making more big plays too. They definitely have more explosive plays in the passing game than they had last year. That was the biggest thing that showed up when they played better competition. They had no explosive playability. I think they have that now. And you mentioned the tight ends, and they have had a string of them. This guy they got right now, though, is so versatile, and they're so creative with him. Not just catching the ball, but they line him up in many different places. He'll be a quarterback. He was a high school quarterback. They've run the read option with him around the goal line. They do all kind of different things with him, and I like what Andy Kotelnicki has brought to the offense. They put stress on you because they show you so many different things. I don't think they do a lot of complicated things, but they sure present themselves in a way that puts stress on the defense.
Yeah, I remember watching him at Kansas for years. He'd have like tackles playing receiver.
Yeah.
And he does, it's strange, but it's fun and it's interesting. And you know what I think it does? I think it keeps the players engaged. If you're running the same formations, the same plays on a weekly basis, I think it just gets redundant. And some of the weird stuff he does, I think keeps the guys involved mentally and focused mentally. So I think there is reason to believe that this year they might really have a chance to make things really interesting.
I think their defense is still really talented. Like their numbers aren't the same as they were last year under Manny Diaz in terms of sacks and tackles for loss and those kind of things. They had a couple bad halves. They had a bad first half against Bowling Green at home early. They had a bad first half against USC in their last time out. But other than that, they've played really solid defense, and they've got all kinds of talent. So their defensive front is still affecting the quarterback in significant ways. It's just not showing up in as many sacks at this point in the season.
Yeah, it's still super disruptive, though. And every quarterback looks at that group, it's like, all right, today is the day I get the ball out quick.
Yeah, that's right.
Now I'm going to be looking for 3 and 4 today. That's for sure.
Yeah. And, the other thing it does, and this, as well, being a quarterback is, the other thing you have to do, or at least have in your repertoire when you play a team like Penn State, is okay. Well, we got to keep a back end of chip on Abdul Carter.
Yeah,
we need help on him. Or that's one less receiver out in the route. Or we need to keep tight ends in and do more max protection. Well, that's less guys running routes into the pass pattern. So there's a real trade-off, even if they're not, getting there and sacking the quarterback. They're affecting your offense and affecting your quarterback because of adjustments that you're making to compensate for them.
Yeah, it's going to be I think it's going to be fascinating. Game of cat and mouse. I know it's a couple weeks from now. Could Penn State lose this week or Ohio State lose this week? Sure. The look ahead is a real thing, but I think it's unlikely with how well these teams are playing right now. Let's look at Penn State. Let's look at Indiana. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm struggling to figure out how I'm quantifying this run right now, Todd. I look at them and they're relentless. And I know that the injury to Curtis Rourke is less than ideal. I've hurt a thumb. I'm sure you have too. You played the position long enough. I'm sure you've probably had something. I had 3 pins in my right thumb and scarred still to tell the story. So it's a real thing. 2 questions here. 1, can this run continue without Curtis Rourke? And 2, How real is this team beyond the quarterback?
Yeah. I'm going to answer that part first. I do think that it's a real team. I had them in early at UCLA in week 3, and they were a cool story at that point. Kurt Signetti, he's a sound bite. He's a fun guy, Pittsburgh guy, got a chip on his shoulder. And all these guys he brought with him from James Madison kind of had that same attitude of, why can't we win right now? I don't care if we're in Bloomington or Indiana and the Big Ten, doesn't matter, right? And so I was impressed with them there, and they have just continued to do the same thing. They continue to beat people badly. And Nebraska is a good football team, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. They have a freshman quarterback, and he looked like a freshman quarterback in that game on Saturday, but their defense has been pretty legit all season.
Yeah.
Didn't slow Indiana down at all. I mean, their execution level on offense is as good as I've seen. I mean, they really execute at a high level in both the run game and the pass game. So I think they're real. Defensively, I wouldn't say they're dominant, but they're very opportunistic. They're aggressive. They attack the line of scrimmage. They get a lot of negative, chaotic plays out of their defense. Now, as far as the quarterback, I think a big part of that offensive execution and success is that Curtis Rourke is playing at an extremely high level.
Yeah.
Very calm demeanor, sees everything, makes the right decisions, accurate with the football, and has such a wealth of experience in his back pocket that nothing he sees is fooling him or confusing him. So how long they can continue with Taven Jackson, who's very talented, maybe is more physically gifted than Curtis Rourke, but it just doesn't have the reps, right? So it'll be interesting to see how hurt Rourke is, and when he does come back, if he's 100% able to grip the ball and throw the ball and do all the things he was doing or not. But I think in order to beat a team like Ohio State, I think they're going to need Curtis Rourke to be behind center to do that. But I think they're legit, and I was talking about it on my podcast this morning, just how I was amazed when we did the game in week 3, all those guys that came from James Madison, and just like the coach, it's like this chip on their shoulder that, people are saying, well, you are maybe a great player in the Sun Belt, but now you're in the Big Ten. I'm like, so what? Good football players are good football players. And you're seeing that with their receivers, their running backs, their linebackers, their defensive rush ends. All those guys that were very productive players at JMU are just as productive at Indiana in the Big Ten right now. It's pretty cool to see.
It's super cool, and it's cool to see guys that don't check the measurable boxes as far as height, weight, size, speed, arm talent. I mean, you can win with anticipation and accuracy. You can win with comfort level and playing on time and playing with urgency. So I think it's cool to see, and it's got to give people hope that, hey, they can maybe do it at their place with guys that look similar. The problem is it's ruining it for every first-year coach that doesn't win 10 games in the first year with a team that won 3 the year before. You've seen Michigan. It was against Washington at their place. Mm-hmm. You've seen them with Tuttle at quarterback. You've seen them with Orgy. It's a mess. I don't know what else to tell you. And it's one thing for the quarterback to struggle. It's another thing for the offensive line to regress as much as they've had when really no threat on the perimeter whatsoever outside of their tight end. If they don't have Khalil Mullings, I don't know what their record is. It might be 2-5. So how does it regress so significantly from one year to the next?
Yeah, it is a little confusing because they have a lot of guys that were back, players that maybe weren't starters but played significant snaps last year in roles, particularly on the defensive side. Yeah. Their defense is like 10th in the Big Ten right now in total defense, which that surprises me. They have some studs up front. They have rush ends. They got Will Johnson, an outstanding corner, Barham, the middle linebacker who transferred from Maryland. They've got guys, but they have not played at a very high level defensively, I think, the way people expected them. Offensively, it's just their offensive line just is not what it has been. And that was their identity. The last 3 years with Jim, when they beat Ohio State, when they won the Big Ten, when they went to the playoffs, it was driven by their offensive line. They won the Joe Moore Award 2 years in a row. They didn't win it last year, but they were just as good last year when they won the national championship. Washington's offensive line won the Joe Moore Award, and I think Michigan's guys kind of took that personal when they played him in the championship game. But they don't have that this year. And then the quarterback thing you mentioned, they've played three guys and they don't have any answers. So here they are, they're 4-3 coming up on week 8 or game 8, and I don't know that they even know what their identity is. And it's amazing that a team that was undefeated and played for the national championship last year could be that far removed from that 1 year later.
And it's not just the identity aspect of it, but you're telling me you come out of the bye week and that's your performance? Like,
right.
And look, we're going to talk about Illinois. I think Illinois is good. I got a lot of respect for what they're doing right now. But to score 7 against a team that coming into the game was giving up 4+ yards per carry, it's baffling.
Yeah, it is. And Mullings, you're right. I mean, Mullings is and coming into the year, he wasn't even expected to be the feature guy. That was supposed to be Donovan Edwards. This was supposed to be his team, his year, and he's been just okay. And Mullings has been better than that, and without him, they wouldn't have beaten the USC. I mean, he basically won that game for them in the fourth quarter, and it could have been a whole lot of a different story for them.
Yeah, really interesting. I'll ask you about one more team, and that's Illinois, before we get into some bigger picture stuff quickly. But Illinois, they're sitting in a pretty good spot right now. They got the one loss. That loss was to Penn State. You called the game. I think they're notoriously underrated. They kind of always seemingly are. When they've been good, it's like it takes people 3 months to figure out, Illinois is pretty good. I think Brett's done a great job. I think the offense is interesting. Altmaier, and they have 2 difference makers at wideout. I thought their defense showed some growth last week with the performance. So how much of a contender can this team be? Or are they the type of team that's going to play spoiler against some quality opponents down the stretch?
Yeah. So I think just like when we were talking about Indiana, that I think that team has taken on the personality of Curt Cignetti. I think this Illinois team takes on the personality of Brett Bielema. Okay, the way they play is the way he's comfortable coaching and the way he wants his team. They're physical at the line of scrimmage. They can run the football. Luke Altmaier is playing really well this year. He's the biggest thing. He's taking care of the ball. Last year he threw too many interceptions. He was careless with the football. This year he's not. But even in that game against Michigan, he was like 9 for 18 for 80 yards. It wasn't him throwing the football. It was their running game and it was their defense. Their defense forced 3 turnovers. Everything is better. Last year, after Walters left to take the head job at Purdue, the defense took a big step backwards last year. All right. Now they're back playing much more consistent this year, and they play complementary football. And Brett wants to play those games where it's they limit the number of possessions you get. You slow the game down. You're physical in the line of scrimmage, hope to get it in the fourth quarter and try to win it there. Well, they lost one like that at Penn State, but they actually played well on the road. It was a low-scoring game, and they played the same kind of game against Michigan, forced a few turnovers, and won the game 21-7 at home. So I think they're a good football team. I don't know that they're a great come-from-behind team against a good team. But if the game can go according to script for them and they can stay on schedule, they're a tough out.
Good to hear. I'm glad that your observations appear to be online with kind of where I'm at. Of the teams that you've seen, and you've clearly seen them all, how many teams, and I know it's somewhat dependent on what happens elsewhere, but how many teams do you think deserve a spot in the college football playoff as we fast forward? Because I know that we're going to look at teams that have had good performances, bad performances, high ceilings, low floors. I kind of go more on the ceiling than I do the floor based on how I want to watch and consume college football in the postseason. But I'll kind of leave it open-ended. How many teams in the Big Ten should be in the mix come playoff time?
Well, look, I think there's still a lot of football left to be played, right? And there's still marquee games. I mean, I think right now you look at Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State. I think those 3 right now. And then I think Indiana, again, depending on Curtis Rourke and what that situation is, I think those 4 teams are certainly, very likely candidates to be considered for the college football playoff. And then I think, Illinois might be a notch below that. But I think those 4 teams, and 3 of them are undefeated, ironically. But I think those 4 teams for sure are serious contenders.
Very good, buddy. Really appreciate your time, man. It's always great to see you. Any quarterbacks that have stood out to you that you've seen or come across this year that are off the radar?
I don't know about off the radar. I mean, I think, people know about Curtis Rourke now.
Yeah.
I knew about him. I'm from Ohio, and so I'm familiar with Mid-American Conference football and Ohio U, and and so I knew he was a player, and he was the Conference Player of the Year 2 years ago. And I think I really think Dylan Gabriel. I think it's interesting. Bo Nix was there 2 years.
Yeah.
And the situation is very similar, though, right? He comes in, he's an older guy. He gets away from a situation, that maybe wasn't great for him at the end. He gets a new start, a new fresh air, beginning. But what he's done in 8 months there, and just the leadership he has, the way the team rallies around him, is very, very impressive. Not just his numbers on the field, but just his effect on the team, because he's a very different personality than Bo Nix was, but from a competitor standpoint and a leader standpoint, they're very, very similar.
Yeah, really interesting. Really interesting. Anything that's caught your attention in the SEC or with Notre Dame, perhaps?
Well, I think that the thing that's caught my attention in the SEC was I caught enough of that Georgia game the other night to I think anybody that was ready to write them off, it is wrong. It's wrong to do. I mean, they got too much talent, too much depth. And I think that they made a real strong statement in that game, particularly defensively, in a hostile environment on the road. I was very impressed with that. I think quietly, and you had them a couple weeks ago, I think quietly people were ready to just dismiss LSU after they lost to USC in week 1, and they just kind of keep winning. And I think Nussmeier's playing at a very high level. I think that he is, I think defensively they've been okay, better at times than others, but I think he has played at a pretty high level. So I'm impressed with him and what he's done. And then the other thing that stands out to me, and I don't know how it may end this week, the fact that Army and Navy are both undefeated and both ranked. Navy plays Notre Dame this week. Army plays them in a couple weeks. I may actually be doing that game, the Notre Dame Army game in Yankee Stadium, but which would be kind of a fun deal. But anyway, I think that's super cool that those two teams, for the first time since 1945, are both ranked at this point in the season.
Yeah, it's one of the great stories of the sport. We'll be doing the Army, we'll be doing Navy and Notre Dame this week.
Oh, sweet.
And it's going to be awesome. I mean, it's not in Yankee Stadium, so you one-upped us there, but hopefully you have to pay local taxes. They're in the borough. So awesome, man. Really, really great perspective. Always a lot of fun to visit with you. Keep up the amazing work. Tell Noah we say hello. We look forward to seeing you soon. Hello. This sounds good.
All right, man. Take care.
See you, buddy. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Like always, really appreciate you guys being here. For those of you that are here with us via the podcast platform, continue to like, rate, and subscribe. We appreciate all of that. Those of you on the ESPN College Football YouTube page, hit that thumbs up button and know that we appreciate you guys for commenting. We read the comments. We check them out, the nice ones at least. We try to filter through some of the mean ones, but occasionally the mean ones land. That's why we went Big Ten today. You guys say we can't do Big Ten? Oh, yeah, we can. And yeah, we will, especially as things continue to move forward here into November in college football. So for all of us here at ACF, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.